Welcome, everyone. Hi, my name is Deborah Wang, Artistic Director of DesignTO. DesignTO is a nonprofit arts organization that is best known for its annual DesignTO Festival happening every January. DesignTO would like to acknowledge that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As well, DesignTO would like to draw attention to the grassroots organization Toronto Indigenous Harm Reduction. TIHR emerged in April 2020 during the first wave of the pandemic in response to a shutdown of frontline services and a lack of basic needs for Indigenous unhoused folks in the city. Earlier this year, TIHR received a CBC Toronto Community Champions Award. Please consider donating. Created in partnership with University of the Arts, London, UAL, and OCAD University, the In Conversation series spotlights designers from Canada and the UK. As the title suggests, faculty, students, and alumni from UAL and OCAD will be in conversation with each other and with industry experts to discuss contemporary issues, research, and creation in design. Welcome to the sixth event of the series. We're pleased to be speaking with David Chambers and Kevin Haley of Aberrant Architecture, and artist activist and architect Michael Lee Poy. David, Kevin, and Michael will discuss how they weave color, humor, play, and participation into their multidisciplinary approaches to architecture, installations, festivals, and public space. If you have any questions during the event, please use the live chat. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi,
hello.
everyone.
Bonjour.
Michael's in Montreal today, and Kevin and David are in London, England. Okay, so we just want to kick off the conversation with some introductions. So I'll ask maybe Michael, you to start, and then David and Kevin to follow, to introduce yourselves, your practice, anything you want to share with our audience and with each other.
Thank you, Deborah, and thanks DesignTO and my good friends in London. As we say here in Montreal, which is both English and French. So, you know, if I was speaking in French, I'd say, hey, mes amis, comment ça va? And I've heard this in some program, they speak in the French dialect and say, how are you, my good friends? Right, like that. And it's very common here in Montreal to talk in multilinguals in addition to other populations that have come here. So again, Michael Lee Poy, assistant professor, OCAD University in Toronto, and I'm sharing my support for the Blue Jays, who are almost made it into the playoffs, and we hope to see them in the World Series, which is happening right now in the next few years. And just to be honest, I'm not a sports fan really, but I love blue, and I love my new home, Toronto, and especially my university, OCADU. What about me? My parents are from Trinidad and Tobago. I was born and raised in Montreal, and throughout my life have been back and forth, as well as New York, which I did my undergrad at Pratt Institute. So I've lived in many places, but my place of birth is Montreal. My practice goes broad, just like my friends here, especially considering our education as architecture. And I know we'll have some good conversations on that education because you're also teachers. And also a masquerade. And I have a question. You all just posted yesterday on Instagram about the class you're teaching, and And I'd like to, inquire more about what you share on your Instagram page, just because it has a lot to do with what I do as well. So I'm very involved in Carnival and what we call costume, especially in indigenous practices here. It's regalia, right? And I almost prefer to use regalia as opposed to just costume. And how one expresses themselves, amplifies their dreams and fantasies on the road for 2 days in the Caribbean, also throughout the world. And that space is very, that space is sort of my holiday. I love that space and anything about it. And that's me for now. Gentlemen?
Dave, do you want to introduce yourself? I'll introduce myself, and then we can do Aberrant between us or something.
Yeah, okay. So hello, everyone. And thanks also DesignTO for inviting us to this conversation. My name is David. I'm one of the co-founders of Aberrant Architecture. It's a practice founded with Kevin, who's next to me on the screen anyway. We, like Michael, share a lot of similar interests in multidisciplinary practice. A little bit about myself. So I was born in London, but grew up in Wales, and then moved to England for my university training, and then stayed in London, where I met Kevin, where we were both studying together postgraduate at the Royal College of Art. I think I'll just pass on to Kev now, and then we can talk about our practice.
Yep. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. So I was originally born in Kent, just outside of London. I studied originally, I was interested in art, and then I moved into interior design. And I had a funny way into architecture, only really studying at art schools. And so I met David at the RCA, and we had a very similar sort of agenda, but different ways of approaching it. And there was always a really good tension in our debates that I thought would lead to a great practice. And I think also what's really important, I think, to mention, I think, Dave and I think were kind of come from similar sort of backgrounds. So as well as being very interested in sort of art and architecture and going to one of the best schools in the world at the time, we were also very down to earth. So we enjoyed having a pint in London and having a shared sense of humor. So I think that's really important in how our practice started. In terms of that practice, it was an idea born out of the RCA. And we eventually set up in 2010 after we won a residency at the V&A, where we were given a studio for 6 months, an amazing studio in the Sackler Centre. And we were able to start Aberrant Architecture. And we've since then gone on to design installations, interiors, small bits of architecture, public spaces, etc. The outcome isn't necessarily the most important thing to us. It's more about the process, and we're driven to make things that are meaningful and beautiful. And I think our calling card with the meaning is the ability to work with groups in collaboration, local community groups, to discover place. And I also think we have a great ability to construct narratives that tell people perhaps about the history of a place or how we could think about a place, and those are weaved together into our projects. And that's enough. That's enough for now. But that gives you a bit of an idea about what we do.
Now, maybe Michael, you had mentioned the Aberrant Instagram post in the beginning, so maybe that's a good point to kind of launch us into the conversation.
Yeah, what do you mean by? I'll just read it off. This introductory brief explored the work of John Haydock and his archived work, translating these into a design for a mask, and that's on their Instagram page.
Yeah, so I mean, we're now teaching back at the RCA. So we came from the RCA, set up the practice, and now we've gone back to practice. And there's a project being run at the moment with about 100 students at the RCA, where they're each given one of John Haydock's drawings and asked to translate that with their own personal story into a design of a mask or a folly, something that had a performative aspect to it. And then we were able to go to the RA because there's going to be an exhibition in March next year about his work, and the students were able to show their ideas with one of John's close friends, actually. So it was a really sort of intense workshop. But obviously, John Haydock also is a massive inspiration for our practice as well. So it was like an honor to be a part of that project, really.
And what was what was some of the takeaways from the day? Like, what were the?
It was really interesting to see how a lot of the students had taken different aspects from his work. So poetry, apparently he was really bad at writing poetry, but a lot of students attempted to write poetry and they read it out in the RA. Certainly one of the students made one of his structures at 1-to-1, and it was a performance, very much picking up on the idea that architecture can become a character, which I thought was really enjoyable. And so there was just like lots of different sort of interpretations, but actually they did a very good job of picking up some of the important aspects of his work. So, and also it was really great to see a lot of them drew. You know how John used to draw tiny little sketches? They all just drew tiny little sketches. So that was great.
Because for me as well, I found it interesting seeing that work come out, and also the similarity with some of Michael's work somehow in that they're almost like these characters that you imagine you'd see in a carnival or as a kind of a piece of sort of street theatre. And I guess it got me thinking actually of maybe some of the kind of overlap between our practice and the importance of not just the final design or what it looks like, but actually the meaning behind it and what the different aspects of the design represent. And I was wondering, maybe Michael, if you could kind of talk a bit more about how you deal with that in your work, especially because I was doing a little bit of kind of research into kind of carnival and street theatre, and that sort of aspect I've read seems to be not so prevalent these days. There's more of a focus on the kind of aesthetic and the sort of what things look like, and the sort of meaning behind stuff is sort of not as popular or as to kind of convey. But I don't know, what's your experience of that?
Can you ask that last part again? Sorry, in regards to the meaning.
So I've read that in sort of carnival culture, certainly in Notting Hill in London, there's more of a focus on kind of what the outfits and performances look like, and less of a focus on what the kind of on the meaning or the kind of the history or the rituals and I guess it struck me that that's something that's very interesting in both our work. That's kind of, it's not just how it kind of looks and how it might be aesthetically pleasing, but also there's a depth or there's a meaning behind the choices we make in our designs.
True. Yeah, I understand now the ritual, especially when you say ritual aspect of engaging with work and beyond architecture, and it just makes me think of the performativity of architecture, especially in your work, right? Not to throw it back on you, but that that topic is there. But more in regards to carnival, is that yes, it's the aesthetic, but there's so many levels and histories to that aesthetic, and what we call traditional characters that have been part of at least Trinidad and Tobago Carnival for about 100 years, and just constantly repeating that expression year to year, and why why is it constant? And because it's social commentary, right? So there's the baby doll, which is not necessarily gendered. Is it gendered? No, it's not. And other costumes, right? To perform this idea of what was happening then is that single mothers were there was a lot of single mothers, and as you understand, the Caribbean, our history is entangled with many histories and many cultures, and has been a repository, for piracy, for I don't know, since the last few hundred years. But it's really social commentary, and what I'm involved in is Moko Jambi, which is stilt dancing, stilt walking, and it's a West African tradition that is arrived in the Caribbean. Its first reference, I think, is 1791 in St. Vincent, I think, and it's been there ever since. And there's been a resurgence, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, because we are pretty much one of the meccas, not the mecca of Carnival. There's also Brazil, and it's celebrated all over the world. But really, to get back to the aesthetic part, there's really a lot of histories behind that, and you can choose when you participate to enter at any direction, even as an audience member. And the nice thing about Trinidad and the Caribbean, there is no fence between the audience and the performer, right? So you can actually cross that imagined boundary. Sometimes it's held by ropes, by security, but you see a friend there, hey, you dance up a little bit, and that's what it is. It's about an emancipation practice. How do you take advantage of these 2 days to, as we say, jump up, free up, dance up? And for architects, I think it's just one of those places where, as makers and designers, we have this opportunity to direct that, that performativity, the construction, the design, and especially because it's not a building. And I just want to pause on that. I love it because it's quick, it's fast. I'm not in this thing for 3 years, right? And the documentation that goes with it. So similar amounts of documentation can happen, but from the architectural perspective, it's different, and the scales are different.
Yeah, I think one of our projects, that's certainly one of our early projects, I think we've got a picture of it, the Tiny Traveling Theatre, really pulls together a lot of those ideas of the carnivalesque, of a kind of a project that arrives in the public realm for a couple of hours, unfolds. So it's actually a traveling theatre, and we designed it for Clerkenwell Design Week back in 2012 now. And the idea was that it would arrive in the public space. The tables would fold down to create a sort of impromptu holding area, and then people could go inside and enjoy sort of small micro performances for about 15 minutes, I think, and then they would come out, and then other people would go in. But again, the sort of, on the one hand, aesthetically, the structure looks quite different, interesting, but we were very interested in all the different ingredients, about the historical ingredients that kind of related to the design moves. So the story of the narrative that we created for this project was based around this historical figure called Thomas Britton, who lived in the area. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kev, I think it was the 18th century.
Yeah, right.
And he set up, he was a traveling coal salesman, so he would kind of go around the local area delivering coal to various homes and offices. Then above his coal shed, he created his own small little concert theatre that he made in his spare time, with kind of found objects. It was quite big. He even got like an organ inside, and in the day, it became very famous, and it would attract sort of amateurs who would come to do performances, but also superstars such as Handel came to actually play there. So we just thought this story was just really incredible, and we wanted to bring it back to life as a piece of street theatre. So we kind of constructed this design that all the kind of information about the original theatre was just text-based. So we kind of interpreted little text fragments or references into sort of spatial moves. So, I mean, the biggest one, for example, is the roof itself, where you can see we've created this sort of organ type structure that was made from coal scuttles. And the coal scuttle, for those of you in North America that maybe don't know what they are, were these little kind of buckets that people would use. They had a special kind of scoop top so that you could scoop your coal out of your coal shed outside and bring it in to put into your coal fire. So we kind of reused these existing industrially produced products to kind of create a sculptural roof. And I think...
Dave, I was going to say, do you know, it's funny now looking at this image on the screen after I've just spent a few weeks looking at John Haydock's archive. This could be one of his projects.
Well,
I think at the time we wasn't so familiar with his work, but you know, I'm now looking at it, that the coal scuttles you're talking about on the roof look like hair. You know, the funnel coming out looks like a little nose. It's certainly got that charm of a character, but then it's got this story behind it.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, we've always been interested in sort of this idea of characters, I think, with our projects and stories. But I agree, it's interesting looking back and seeing the kind of the references that maybe we weren't so aware of at the time coming through, I think.
I mean, we obviously use that historical story Dave is talking about to help design the architecture that then formed the character. And I'm now thinking that you need, you know, the intention wasn't to set out to make a cool looking red object. The intention was, how do you communicate this story? And by going through that process, you end up with this kind of quite charming character in the end. So the two are supportive of each other, but the end goal isn't to make something unique or cool. It's driven by process, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and then just the last thing I think, just to relate to Michael, what we were talking about is, I think the whole structure itself is like this, you know, mini carnival in a way, mini piece of street theatre that, you know, arrives, almost demonstrates how the public realm could be used in a different way. So it's not just you know, a place that you can kind of walk from A to B. It can become, the public realm can be a space for people to socialize, to occupy, to, you know, go to the theater. It can also be a workspace. It can also have all these other functions. And I think that's something that we really find quite attractive in this idea of the carnivalesque, is how it can show potentials for, you know, you can disrupt the everyday rules that might exist in an area for, say, 2 or 3 days. And then within that sort of new space, different things can be allowed to happen, which maybe suggest, you know, how different, you know, how we can evolve things. And certainly that project for us back in 2012 was very, you know, interesting as a sort of a pointer for, and got us thinking about, you know, how can our public realm, our public spaces, both exterior and increasingly interior spaces, how can they be used in a greater variety of different ways? So it's not just a place to kind of walk through, but like I said, you know, you can work. It can be a workspace. It can be a play space. It can be somewhere to socialize, and so on.
Yeah, and Kevin, it is a cool looking red thing, right? Don't forget that. Like, you know, if somebody was walking by, and red would be the first color to get their attention, even in the peripheral vision, right? And it's like, oh, what is that? Where, you know, and it creates that connection, and that's what I kind of love about it. And it can move, right? So the story, the historical reference moves, you know, is taught. Is used, you know, as a strategic, you know, learning tool in other places. So that's fabulous. And I think, you know, you're at the cutting edge of carnival design, because a lot of attention is not, back to the other connotation, is not on the mobile architecture, right? How do you move thousands of people through the street, right? And in Carnival, in Nottingham, just about everywhere, you know, where's the weeby truck? Where's the food truck? Where's, you know, these are important to keep people going, right? To keep that emancipation practice going. So, so you're right. You know, you're right on point with designing these mobile, Haydock-inspired maybe objects.
I think was actually I mean, it's a long time ago, but just remembering now, one of the things I really enjoyed about that project was it was for Clerkenwell Design Week, a sort of event, celebration of design in the area, but it's not like a mass of people on the streets kind of doing things. So this little thing felt like it was a little rule breaking structure coming along, asking people, just have a party, just like come and have some ice cream and some beer off the back of the truck. It's 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. Come and watch an impromptu piece of theatre. And you know, the sense of it, sometimes I would look at people or overhear them say, what the hell is that? What's going on? Like, as if like something interesting has happened, but also it's a bit going against the norm. So stuff like that I absolutely love, because it disrupts that and encourages us to remember at the end of the day, like you said, Michael, maybe you just want to get up and have a move, you know, have a dance, you know, express that.
Excellent. And let me your the Design Council and your history with design in England is just so long. It's as long as Carnival for us, and you have the infrastructure and resources, which coming, you know, living in Trinidad and Tobago, we're very, very jealous of that. Just because we don't have it in smaller nations like that, and I always send my students to the Design Council website just to, you know, and also potential clients, because the information is there in 10 minutes. And also, you know, DesignTO, and all to say that I love design, and I worked on in 2015 a colloquium design in Trinidad and Tobago, Ministry of Design, and it was just a public awareness campaign for us, and that happened was during elections, and it was a kind of watershed moment for designers in the country. I mean, it wasn't a huge colloquium, but we had papers from all over the world, and it was really just to bring the design word, the design process officially into government, if possible. So we fantasized about a ministry, and I actually went to a conference afterwards in Guadeloupe with the co-chair, Dr. Leslie Ann Noel, and they thought I was the minister or something, right? It's just, it had that sort of impact. And that was 5-6 years ago. And if anything had to happen now, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, would be some sort of a design week. And that was part 2, if it happened. But as you know, the arts, creativity, generally in the world is, you know, is low down on priority lists.
Maybe I could loop back to, we were talking about like disruption of the public realm, and maybe Michael, you could speak a little more to that with regards to what happens during Carnival, especially in Trinidad and Tobago.
Disruption. Yeah, that's a good word. It does happen. There's many communities that don't participate at all, right? They leave. Opposite, because it has sort of how should I say it? It celebrates freedom just about on every level, and it's hard to cut that off, right? So, and especially in the tropical environment where you're half naked or just about naked, it goes into different kind of conversation, especially for religious groups and raising your teenage kids. And is this what we want to see? How do you share that with kids? I have 2 teenage kids, and I've had them involved from as early as possible, because they will see it anyways. The music is everywhere leading up to Carnival. It's on the radio, and it's not necessarily some of it needs to be censored, right? So how do you engage kids into that, especially with its cultural history? So it's a challenge year after year. People have been protesting its demise. It shouldn't happen. We shouldn't do this every year, especially with the pandemic too. But it's a massive part of our culture, and the disruption is expected, it's denied, it's wanted. And on a personal level, I can't see everything. I'm usually on the back end making things. I don't party. I don't really fed that much, surprisingly, because I see the back end, right? We are generators of this space, designers, and that's what I love. I love to be behind the scenes, probably like both of you, as designers and architects.
Michael, I was just going to ask, in what you were saying there, when you're like the back scenes and you're making things, and the carnival's going on, and sometimes in our work, we think about obviously how these little things we're making could be used and might be used, but sometimes we see unexpected ways people start to interact with our objects, which we really enjoy. I'm just wondering, in the carnival, has there ever been like times when you've made things or done things and then it's took an unexpected turn, and things have cropped up that you didn't quite imagine?
Like when it fails? Things fail.
No, really not.
Always. I think that's the spark. That's the happy moment that I help to design, right? If I'm designing regalia or costume for somebody or children, that's sort of my focus. I want them to feel beautiful, right? Or perform the character that they've envisaged or I've envisaged, right? And once you see that light, that spark, and as teachers, that once the students get it, that's it. They're in. They're convinced. They're not eating, they're not sleeping, and they're designing. And I think part of my challenge as a teacher, professor, is to guide that energy, right? So momentum, because sometimes it just goes overboard. And it's like, no, temper this, go this way. So yes, I'm part of the team that designs for those unexpected moments. And like you say, I love to see that. That's you don't know when it's going to happen. It's gonna but it's coming, and it's fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's designing enough to inspire and to guide people into wanting to interact with things, but then the structures or the design that you're doing, there's enough for them to then add their layer of personality or character on top, so then you get these unexpected moments start to occur. I think that's finding that balance, I think, is something that we really enjoy, making sure that it's not too contrived, too controlled, that there's room for people to layer on top of it, riff on top of it. A bit like a jam, when you're in a band and you play that structured song and then someone puts in another note and it's like, oh, I like that, let's do that again, and then something else starts to occur. It's a bit like that, I think.
It's part of your process, the co-creating process, right?
Yeah. I think one of our projects that certainly is a very good example of that would be Landscape for Play, which I believe I've got a picture of, where
let's get it up.
I think we kind of we really imagined it as this giant stage or platform where there's a kind of a series of design elements and structures that act like invitations for people to come and use and occupy, but they're not overly prescriptive. So you'll see in the picture you've got this almost giant sort of surface that's made up of different colored patterns that start to create suggestions for different types of spaces, and then you can see there's sort of door frames and sunken rooms, or that the big red structure at the back. It's just a big sort of geometric sort of space that people can get into. But it was all, like I said, kind of invitations for people to come and occupy in different ways. So on the one hand, it functioned as a playground where children would come and play. But you notice on the periphery of the structure, where we've got the series of steps, children's parents would sit and socialize. And there's also a lot of what we were really happy to see was that there's a lot of kind of uses of this project that happened that we didn't originally imagined. So the project itself is located in Madrid, in Spain, and I think there was a number of performances by a kind of a choir that took place, utilizing all the different sort of spaces. And that's something that we really get excited about with our projects, where we try and leave enough space in them so that people can bring their own energy or bring their own ideas and kind of, as Kevin said, like, riff on top of what we've done. And I think that's definitely something that's important for our design in the way that we definitely see it as a collaboration between our ideas, but leaving enough space for people to come and bring their ideas on top.
And it's amazing, just I remember being there again and watching people use this, and really this surface is just color and pattern, but color and pattern has a way of inviting people into it where they can imagine their own space on top, and games. And I remember these children, those black lines going across the structure became this game of run and slide on your knees, and which black line do you hit? We never thought about a sliding hit the knees with the black line game, but they did. And that's a really good example of rifting. And then I saw a dad and a young boy inventing their own game around the pebbles. And then so it was really good just to be the architect standing in there and watching how people interpreted your design. That really is just a clever use of color and pattern as an invitation.
I was going to ask you any of those narratives, but you answered that question perfectly. Thank you.
Well, it's a horizontal carnival, right?
Yes. But go ahead.
No, go on.
No.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what's very interesting about that project is the duration as well. So it was there for sort of 6 months. So again, it came in, kind of transformed the space, suggested all these possible new uses, and then it went away, which is actually something quite different to one of our more recent projects. So where we kind of built on these ideas actually in a shopping center in Eastbourne, which is a town on the south coast of England, and what we've kind of, for a permanent commission now, sort of inserted this idea, a lot of these ideas that we were thinking about in Madrid into a shopping center context. I think hopefully we've got a picture of one of the spaces where you'll see that we've kind of inserted this giant swing that can, it's like a social swing, so it can kind of take 3 people. But then around that, there's a series of seats and spaces that people can use for work. And again, it's this idea that was sort of putting in colorful, playful insertions into spaces that up till now, it's quite unexpected, but it suggests, how we can use these public areas, both in the interior and the exterior, in new and different ways. And I think going back to the kind of what we were talking about earlier, I think it's interesting, on the one hand, I think and we always try to do this with our projects, like the time traveling theater, that you can enjoy it as this sort of big quirky red thing and just kind of, and that's something that's really interesting. Or this project in Eastbourne, you can, with the bold use of colors, it provides that immediate kind of wow moment that kind of really generates an emotional response. But then there's lots of kind of meaning and kind of history kind of embedded within all of the different designs. So, for example, on top of the swing, there's a is that the pig head?
The pig head, yeah.
The pig head. So that's a pig head, and it's one of the characters from George Orwell's Animal Farm, because George Orwell went to school in Eastbourne. So we kind of wanted to sort of celebrate sort of some of the sort of history and kind of people of the area and embed that into the design. And what we were really fascinated with actually is that on this project, and it's one of the first that we've done this, is we've started to almost embed some of the kind of interpretation into the work. so that people can kind of, if they want to, they can kind of read a little bit about where the different sort of design ideas have come from. And I think everyone's been really pleasantly surprised at how interested people are, and how interested people are in which shouldn't be a surprise, really, in the kind of history of their area, and all the different kind of aspects, and how that's been brought together in the kind of the center of the town, which is the shopping center.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, Michael, I don't know what you think about this, but I was just sitting there thinking that we've got almost different types of temporary and permanent going on. We've got the Tiny Travelling Theatre only ever existed for 3 days. That's it. Then we've got a carnival that is something that pops up that's reoccurring as a temporary kind of event. And now we've got what we've just done in the Beacon Shopping Centre. It looks temporary. People expect it's not going to be there, but actually it's going to be there for a much longer period. So I'm just wondering if the nature of something being temporary, I wonder if that encourages people more to participate and have that dance and do that because, oh, it's only going to be there for 2 days. Or I just wonder if you had any thoughts on that. I'm just sitting here reflecting. Yeah,
the time factor is huge, and I love how you make that association. Like it's a limited edition, right? A limited moment that you only have that time to experience and engage with it. And I'd go further, and you've brought in, especially in your last project, this idea of materiality and iconography, the pig's head, right? And which is, I think, back to Heddock, right? Your work is right there tied in. And if you could bring up the slide, the Dollar Man slide, I'd like to tie in the conversation with that. And it's a regalia costume I designed in residency in Trinidad and Tobago, now defunct Arts Center, CCA 7, Caribbean Contemporary Arts, and I was there for just a few months, and I was investigating identity and identity and materiality, and I used the dollar bill because it was just laden with symbolism, right? The scarlet ibis, which is one of the national birds, and I said, it was just a thought. Why don't I just make a costume out of this? And no one had ever done that before, right? So when I was performing this on the street, which was about 3 years or 2 years later after the residency, you could understand the attraction of people. You're wearing money, and the fear for me was people just going to take it, right? It was only dollars, right? But people had, is this real money? Is this? And I had to get permission from the government to do that. And that the picture of the Indian is actually a lawyer, and I forget his name, but he came up to me and said, this is the people's money. This is the people's, right? And this is illegal. And I pulled out my my permission from the government, and as long as you don't put it back into circulation, that was the point. But there's another picture of the residency. This is actually on in Carnival, and if you pull up the other one, it's actually nicer, right? So I was the material, which is dollar bill, and the sort of the challenge was how do I reinforce it, because the ones on the top are carrying the the whole weight of everything, and I cut the corners, taped up the edges, and it's stapled together. That's all it is. It's just stapled together, which talks about basically the time that it takes to create these very complex and complicated costumes. And for me as an architect, what's the least amount of resources, energy in order to do that? And how to use paper, right, as a costume. So it definitely made front page way back when, and I haven't brought it out since. And the money has changed as well. The notes have changed. So I throw in materiality and iconography, which are also very important in that temporal discussion. Like, how do you get most impact with the material and the colors, right? The red cool object, right? That's just like a beacon. So yeah.
How much did it cost?
Exactly, it was about $600, and I did win $600 prize for, I think I came in 4th or 5th in the competition. But yes, it was a powerful piece, and very proud of it. There was discussions of a whole band, a money band, and stuff like that, but it never materialized, of course.
We've been interested in this idea of working with not currency so much, but certainly kind of going out into the community and kind of gathering sort of ideas in exchange for. Kevin, remind me, it was the project in
Fred.
Yeah, perhaps you want to kind of just talk about how we kind of
yeah. I mean, this is a 1-week project. There's a group in Richmond called Mob Job. It's a collaboration with local designers and the university, and each year they bring in a different architect or artist they want to work with. So we are invited in. I remember getting off the plane not knowing what the hell I was doing, which is always fun, but it was scary. And then we went for a ride around the local area. There was lots of public space that was not being used or had potential to kind of be activated. And then we started to have discussions, and we did drawings. And what came out of that was that this area had a particular historical identity meshed in hawking. And that was expressed with wagons coming down the road with watermelons being sold off the back in song. So an idea came up was, could we build a structure from waste, which is what you see on the screen here. So there was a building being renovated next door, and we kind of borrowed the timber, linked it up to a bike, and then went round to local retailers and collected objects that they were willing to give away for free. And we kind of went down the road in a hawking progression, sung songs. I was wearing a very silly costume. I had a lot of fun. We had our own song that we sung, and we went into these public spaces and we put on an event. We played games, and the idea was that anyone could come out of their house or passing by and tell us who they are and what skill they had in exchange for something off the wagon. And then we would put their name and their skill on a post that would go into the public space. And then we would move on to the next public space. And what we were effectively doing was building a public directory of skills in their area, making the point that we could all come together with these skills and turn that public space into something special. But what was really great about this is this event, a week, had a high impact. But it was an amazing way to meet people, because we're meeting people through having fun, playing, in terms of discovering who they are. And, you know, people got keyboards, guitars, clothes, loads of things off this thing. So it was a great project. Really enjoyed it.
But it's also play, you know, just to tag on play to inform bigger issues of entrepreneurship, of sustainability, right? Which are super important for our practice moving forward. Yeah, great project.
Maybe I'll interject there with that project because we have some questions from the audience. So I'll ask Robin to pull one up. So this is from Sarah Paul. There is a beauty to the ephemeral quality of carnival regalia, but it does create a significant amount of waste and environmental impact of gathering these materials. And I think there's a second part to this. Are there internal discussions with the designers, mass camps, etc., to encourage and consider the use of more local materials or some form of recycling materials from year to year? So actually this question follows well from that previous show of the Fred project.
That's a great question, Sarah. In general, I'd say no. It's a massive point of contention for me, just because our waste management system, at least in Trinidad and Tobago, is challenged. Everything goes into a dump, and if it's amazing if you ever, you know, if you all ever come down and you'll see what happens on the Tuesday, and then the next day it's completely clean, right? So thousands 40,000 people go around the city, and there's all kinds of waste, and within 12 hours it's cleaned up, and after that it pretty much ends up in the dump. So there are minimal sort of attempts. There's discussions going on, definitely not at a government level, but we need to have that discussion. I know in Trinidad and Tobago, probably elsewhere too around the world, because as much fun as you have, there's consequences to this environment, and we've been warned, right? We've been warned. You know, we don't have that much time. I think.
Yeah. Yes, just to kind of add to that, I think. I mean, that issue of waste and you know, temporary projects, and kind of after obviously you build them, they have a sort of shelf life, and then they kind of need to go away. It's something that we really started to kind of to focus on and consider over the last few years, and it's difficult. A lot of the kind of sort of the issues, certainly, you know, when you get into sort of regulations and insurance, and you know, you want to kind of use sort of innovative sort of materials, but then, you know, they don't currently have the kind of sign off for all different contexts and use cases. But there's certainly some ideas that we've kind of incorporated into our projects thus far. Certainly, we designed a Christmas tree for the V&A Museum a couple of years ago, with the idea that we're gonna, and we're still kind of developing these, but we're turning the Christmas trees into kind of into furniture. So it's kind of this idea of, you know, designing something that has one temporary use, but then the sort of the materials or the way that it's kind of designed can then have a legacy use that might be, you know, have a more permanent application. And I guess that, you know, really ties into sort of circular design and kind of designing things so that they don't have this obsolescence, and that's certainly high on our kind of, you know, agendas. I'm sure it is on yours, and loads of kind of designers currently practicing now.
Plus, I also think it makes a difference now. You're getting a lot of material suppliers having a buyback scheme. So you use their material. The architect designer thinks about how do you construct that interior, that structure, so it can come apart. Then that material can be bought back to the supplier. So actually, you're really, you know, it goes back, or it's reused in some way. I think is a really innovative thing coming with lots of material suppliers. So we're certainly linking up with a lot of those now, which is great.
Great, thank you. Robin, do you want to bring up another question? This one from Sophia. Instagrammable architecture is a term coming up given the impact of social media and the way people live nowadays. Do you think the process of creating a space has been influenced by that?
That's a great question, Sophia.
That's a really good question, yeah.
I mean, I think we would say yes, absolutely. And we've been involved with briefs where that's actually been, you know, in the brief in that, okay, you know, we need, you know, where there's a requirement or kind of, you know, to have Instagrammable moments or sort of, so I think it's definitely affected the way that certainly some clients see the production of 3D environments, and, you know, its importance of having these moments where, you know, people can get their sort of Instagrammable shot, and I think it's kind of it's an interesting one, because on the one hand it's good that people get excited about design and want to share sort of these moments, but at the same time just focusing on these sort of one sort of vantage points as well kind of can get a bit sort of tricky, especially as actually, you know, in a kind of an environment, you want people to kind of spread out and enjoy all of it and not just kind of on one. So I think it's, I mean, certainly had a big effect, and it's certainly beginning to filter through into sort of actually becoming a requirement, which is interesting.
The thing is, though, I would say that, you know, take the tiny traveling theatre we showed earlier. That's pre-Instagram. We never, you know, we didn't design that thinking about that, but you could see that project being amazing on Instagram. So I don't think it necessarily has changed our process, but it certainly has come from clients now saying, can we please have an Instagrammable moment? But I've always thought, well, as designers, we're constantly thinking about, you know, color and, you know, using color as a way of divorcing itself from context. So it makes it really inviting. We're thinking about it actually in the everyday, actually in the physical space. It just so happens to also, particularly in our work, look amazing on Instagram. I think for maybe practices or designers doing things that aren't so colorful and things like that, they might be more swayed to begin to use color. And I love color, so great.
Also, I mean, we're clearly influenced by technology and social media, and you know, it's down to what, 2 nanoseconds that, you know, something catches our eye. It's about, you know, swiping, right? But also remember, you know, all those great architects out there that have changed the world in architecture, Zaha Hadid, etc. If you're in the city, go visit, right? It's not just on this device. And once you experience, right, that space, it's different than a device, for sure. And then for us educators, right, how do we design those spaces, and how do we share that knowledge?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Michael. So I think, like, you know, so a lot of our work, it's the memory we want people to take away, and that's in the experience, not by the picture. So certainly on an Instagram platform, the tiny traveling theatre is an object, but you've got to be inside that thing, huddled in next to 4 people with a performer in the middle. I mean, I don't know where else you could experience that, you know, and you can't capture that on Instagram. You've got to go to it.
And maybe not trying to take your picture of it, right?
Yeah,
Right. Maybe not, but that's okay too, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I mean, it doesn't, it's not either or, is it? I think, you know, it's kind of, I think that's important to, you know, they can have the Instagrammable moments, and I think that can be a really good thing. But like we're, you know, we're all agreeing the real importance of, you know, actually experiencing things physically, socially with other people. Certainly something that we've, you know, missed during the kind of last couple of years with the pandemic. And I think whilst there's been a lot of exciting developments with sort of digital experiences, and we've been had to adapt, I think, you know, all of our practices are, you know, really kind of value the sort of the social interaction and kind of encouraging people to come together and experience sort of human connection and an emotional reaction to kind of to objects and spaces and meaning. And I think that's exactly, yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's a nice way to end our conversation. So I want to thank you, Michael, Kevin, David, for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Deborah. It's great.
Don't forget, we have a play date in 2023.
And thank you, Robin. No one can.
Yes, Robin.
Can't see Robin.
Yeah.
She's been pulling the strings.
So yes, thank you also to the DesignTO team, especially Robin Wilcox and Michael Magis, who are working behind the scenes today. And thank you to our audience for joining us. Programs like these are made possible through your support. Join the DesignTO members community. We have new membership tiers and benefits, including year-round programming and a digital library with recordings of events just like this one. Have a great afternoon, everyone.